The cafe was bustling with the usual afternoon crowd. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the clink of cutlery, and the murmur of conversations. There was a low hum of life within the walls of this small, cozy cafe, tucked away on a quiet corner of the town. The kind of place where people came not just for the coffee, but for the comfort it provided. A place where time seemed to slow down, allowing people to lose themselves in their books, their thoughts, or their companions. Daniel sat at his usual spot in the far corner, a small, round table by the window. His eyes were fixed on the pages of a book, but his mind wandered, as it often did. He was a man of routine, a single father who had grown used to balancing the demands of parenthood with the quiet moments of solitude he craved. His son Jake was sitting across from him, busy coloring in a book, his face lit up with concentration. The cafe was particularly crowded today. A mix of regulars and newcomers had filled up nearly every table. There was a buzz in the air, a liveliness that seemed to make the space feel smaller, more intimate. As Daniel scanned the room, his gaze landed on the young girl who had just entered. She moved with purpose but seemed hesitant, her crutches tapping softly against the floor as she made her way across the room. Her face was partially hidden by the hood of her sweatshirt, but even from a distance, Daniel could see the struggle in her movements. She looked around, her eyes scanning the room for an empty seat. There was a slight hesitation in her step as she took in the crowded space. The other tables were occupied, and the girl seemed to falter for a moment, unsure of where to go. Daniel noticed her searching, and without thinking, he raised his hand and waved her over. "Hey, you can sit here," he said with a warm, inviting smile. His voice was calm, friendly, the kind of voice that made you feel safe. The girl froze for a moment, her eyes flickering from the available seat to Daniel, as though weighing the decision in her mind. She was clearly uncertain. Daniel watched her carefully, sensing a hesitation. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to feel like he didn't quite fit in, and he could see that she was struggling with something deeper than just finding a place to sit. After a brief pause, the girl limped slowly toward him, her crutches making soft tapping sounds with each step. There was a visible tension in her posture, as though every move she made was deliberate, calculated. She approached the table, and with a quick glance at Daniel, she finally spoke. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and almost hesitant, as though the simple words were difficult to say. Daniel smiled at her, offering a reassuring nod. "No problem at all. It's not often the cafe gets this packed." He gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "You could sit here. It's a good spot." The girl hesitated again, glancing around the room before settling into the chair opposite him. She placed her crutches beside her, her eyes still avoiding his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet atmosphere between them thick with unspoken words. Daniel went back to reading his book, but something about the girl's presence lingered in the air. He could feel her discomfort, the way she seemed to shrink into herself, trying not to attract attention. It wasn't just the crutches that made her stand out, it was the way she carried herself. The way she seemed to be heightened, as though she didn't want anyone to notice her. It didn't take long before Daniel decided to break the silence. He closed his book and looked at her, offering a kind smile. "I'm Daniel," he said, his tone casual, as though he were talking to an old friend. "What's your name?" The girl glanced up, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a flicker of surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to speak to her at all. She seemed to weigh the decision of whether or not to respond, before finally replying. "Lily," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Lily." "Lily," Daniel repeated, his smile widening. "Nice to meet you. How's your day going?" Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, looking down at her hands as they rested on the table. "It's in Gota's, ... Fine," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She didn't seem like she was in the mood for conversation, but Daniel wasn't about to let the moment slip by. He had seen that look before, the kind of look that spoke of something more, something hidden beneath the surface. "You know," Daniel said, his voice gentle, "I come here almost every day, and I've never seen you around. You new to the area?" Lily nodded slightly, still avoiding his gaze. "I just moved here a few months ago," she explained. "I don't usually come to places like this. But today, I thought I'd try it. Daniel could sense the hesitation in her words. It wasn't just the newness of the cafe that made her uneasy, it was something deeper, something she was struggling to put into words. Before he could ask more, Lily spoke again, her voice quiet but urgent. "Can I ask you something?" Her words hung in the air, and Daniel's attention immediately shifted to her. "Of course," he replied, his tone warm and encouraging. Lily hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering toward the other tables before she finally spoke. "Why did you invite me to sit here?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "There are other tables. Why me?" "You didn't have to." Daniel was taken aback by the question, but as he looked at Lily, he understood the pain behind it. She didn't just want a seat, she wanted to know why someone like her, someone who didn't seem to belong, was being offered a spot at someone else's table. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. He had seen this kind of uncertainty before. It was the same uncertainty he had felt when he first became a single parent, unsure of whether he was enough, whether he could do it all. "I guess I just saw you," he said simply, his voice steady. "I saw you standing there, looking for a place to sit, and I thought maybe you just needed someone to make you feel like you belonged." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. She didn't say anything for a moment, as though she was processing his words. "Why?" she asked again, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just ... me, I'm nothing special." Daniel shook his head gently, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're wrong, Lily. You are special. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to make you feel seen, to remind you that you matter, that you're not invisible." But Lily fell silent, her eyes flickering between Daniel and the table. She looked down at her hands again, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her sleeve. It was clear she had heard those words before, maybe from family, from teachers, but they never seemed to stick. For a long time, she had felt invisible. She had grown used to people looking right past her, avoiding her because of the crutches, because of her disability. People didn't see her for who she truly was, they only saw the difference, the thing that set her apart. But here, in this small cafe, at this corner table, someone had seen her, and for the first time in a long while, Lily felt a flicker of something warm inside. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "No one's ever said that to me before." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. He had always believed in the power of kindness, the power of seeing people for who they truly were, and in that moment, he knew that something had shifted, something had changed in Lily. The conversation fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have shared something real, something meaningful. Daniel went back to his book, but he kept an eye on Lily. He could see the way her posture had softened, the way her shoulders no longer seemed as hunched. As the minutes ticked by, the cafe's usual hum continued, but in that quiet corner, something had changed. The world outside, with its noise and its distractions, seemed a little bit quieter, a little bit gentler, and Lily, for the first time in a long time, felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The weeks that followed were quietly transformative. Lily and Daniel had forged a silent understanding. The cafe, a familiar refuge, had become their place of connection, a spot where the chaos of the outside world seemed to fade, leaving only the hum of comfort and quiet companionship. Every afternoon, after school, Lily would make her way to the cafe, her crutches tapping rhythmically against the floor as she entered. She would glance around, a brief moment of uncertainty in her eyes before she spotted Daniel, who would wave her over with a gentle smile. At first, their conversations were short, punctuated with awkward silences and small pleasantries, but gradually they began to unfold like a delicate flower. Daniel had a way of making her feel safe, his calm presence putting her at ease. He asked her about school, about her interests, and about the little things that made her happy. Lily in turn began to open up slowly, cautiously at first, but soon enough, she found herself sharing things with him she had never told anyone else. "How was school today?" Daniel asked one afternoon, as they sat in their usual corner, sipping their coffee. The question was simple, but it carried a weight that made Lily pause. She had been to school, yes, but it hadn't been an easy day. The kids, as usual, had ignored her, or worse, made cruel remarks. She had grown used to the looks, the pithy, the avoidance, but today, the comments had cut deeper than usual. "It was fine," Lily replied, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Her voice was quieter than usual, and Daniel noticed the change immediately. "Something on your mind?" he asked, his tone gentle. It wasn't the first time she had seemed off. Lily had always worn her emotions on her sleeve, even if she didn't always know how to express them. Lily sighed, looking down at her lap, her crutches resting against the table. "I just don't get it," she said after a moment, her voice tinged with frustration. "Why do they all treat me like I'm invisible, like I don't matter?" Daniel's heart ached as he listened. He could hear the pain in her voice, the years of feeling overlooked and unwanted. He knew that pain all too well. It wasn't just a passing emotion. It was something that stayed with you, something that ate away at your confidence and sense of self-worth. "They don't see you the way I do," Lily Daniel said softly. "But you matter. You always have. You don't need to prove anything to them." Lily met his gaze, her eyes clouded with doubt. "But what if I never fit in?" she asked. "What if no one ever sees me the way you do?" Daniel's voice was firm, unwavering. "Then they're the ones who are missing out. Trust me, Lily. The right people will see you for who you truly are, and those who don't, well, they're not worth your time." Lily looked down at her coffee, the steam rising in gentle curls, but Daniel could see the wheels turning in her mind. It was a lot to take in, especially for someone who had spent so much of her life feeling like an outsider. But for the first time, Lily allowed herself to believe his words. Maybe things could be different. Maybe she didn't have to settle for being invisible. The next day at school, Lily didn't feel quite so invisible. There was a small shift inside her, a newfound sense of strength that she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't that the bullies suddenly stopped them. They were still there, still laughing, still whispering behind her back. But today, Lily didn't care. She walked through the halls with her head held high, her crutches tapping out a steady rhythm beneath her. The whispers still followed her, but they didn't sting the way they used to. She could hear them, but they didn't define her anymore. At lunch, she sat alone at a corner table, her usual spot. But this time, there was a sense of peace in the solitude. She didn't feel the need to fit in, to conform to their expectations. Instead, she took out her sandwich and ate slowly, savoring each bite. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And that, for the moment, was enough. As the week went on, Lily continued to visit the cafe after school. Each time, Daniel greeted her with a smile, and they would sit and talk about everything and nothing, about books, about life, about things that mattered and things that didn't. The routine became a source of comfort for both of them, a predictable haven in an unpredictable world. But even as Lily's confidence grew, she couldn't escape the harsh reality that still followed her everywhere she went. The kids at school hadn't changed. They still made cruel jokes, still treated her like an outsider. But now, something in Lily had shifted. She was no longer looking for their approval. She didn't need it. One afternoon, as they sat together in the cafe, Daniel looked at Lily, noticing how much she had changed in such a short time. The way she sat straighter, the way she laughed more easily. The girl who had once kept her head down was now looking up, her eyes brighter, her smile more genuine. "How's school going?" Daniel asked, his tone casual but laced with curiosity. He knew she had been struggling, but he also knew that something had changed in her. Lily paused, then smiled. It's better. I don't feel so invisible anymore." Daniel felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. "I'm proud of you, Lily." The words seemed to catch her off guard, and she looked at him, her eyes wide. "Really?" "Absolutely," Daniel replied, his voice warm. "You're stronger than you think. You've always been strong." Lily's smile faltered for a moment, as though she was unsure of what to make of the compliment. But deep down, she felt something shift within her. It wasn't just Daniel's words, it was something she had been learning to believe about herself. Maybe she was strong after all. Maybe she didn't need anyone's approval to be worthy. But the next day something happened that would test everything she had learned. It was lunchtime, and Lily was sitting at her usual spot, eating her sandwich, when a group of kids from her class walked into the cafe. She recognized them immediately. Jason, a boy who had always teased her, and his friends. They scanned the room, looking for a place to sit. When they saw her, they exchanged knowing looks. Jason, the leader of the group, sauntered over to her table. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring down at her with a smirk on his face. "Mind if we sit here?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock politeness. He clearly knew the answer, but he wanted to see her squirm. Lily looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment she was tempted to give in, to move aside and let them have the seat. But then she remembered Daniel's words about standing her ground, about not letting others define her. She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength she had. "No," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I'm fine here." Jason raised an eyebrow, surprised by her response. The others in the group snickered, but Jason didn't back down. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. "You really think anyone would want to sit with you? You're a freak, Lily." Lily's heart ached at his words, but she refused to let them show. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, her voice unwavering. "Maybe I am," she said, "but that doesn't mean I deserve to be treated like I don't matter." The room fell silent. Jason stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his friends following him in awkward silence. Lily sat back in her chair, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her hands shook slightly, but she felt something new inside her. It wasn't fear, it was pride. She had stood up for herself. She had refused to be the victim of his cruelty. And for the first time, she felt like she had taken control of her own narrative. When she returned to the cafe that afternoon, Daniel could immediately tell something had happened. She was sitting straighter, her eyes shining with a newfound determination. "You look like you won a battle," Daniel remarked with a knowing smile. Lily nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "I did," she said quietly, "and I didn't even need anyone to fight it for me." Daniel's eyes softened with pride. "I knew you had it in you." For the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. She had people who cared about her, people who saw her for who she truly was. And though the world was far from perfect, Lily knew one thing for sure: she was no longer invisible. Lily continued to visit the cafe with Daniel, and the days became weeks. The small, subtle changes she had felt inside herself were growing more noticeable. The quiet strength Daniel had helped her discover didn't just live inside the walls of the cafe. It was beginning to seep into her life outside. Each time she walked into the cafe, there was a little more ease in her step, a little more confidence in the way she held her head high, no longer hiding in the shadow of fear and self-doubt. It wasn't that the world had suddenly become kind to her. It was still the same, full of challenges and unkindness, but the way she navigated it was different. She had found a new lens through which to see the world, and it was one of empowerment. Lily's heart swelled with pride one afternoon when she walked into the cafe. The barista, a friendly young man named Ethan, greeted her with a warm smile. "Hey Lily, you're looking good today." The compliment caught her off guard, but it was the first time in a long while she didn't shrink away from it. She returned the smile, feeling a flicker of warmth inside her. "Thanks, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. She felt, for the first time in ages, like she was being seen for who she truly was. Not just as the girl with the crutches, but as Lily, a person worthy of kindness and respect. She found Daniel at their usual spot, sitting by the window. He looked up when she approached, his face lighting up with a smile that never failed to make her feel welcome. "Hey, there she is," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "How's your day been?" Lily settled into the chair across from him, her crutches placed carefully beside her. "It's been all right," she said, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "You know, the usual school stuff. Nothing too exciting, but nothing awful either." "Sounds like a good balance," Daniel said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Sometimes, the usual is the best thing we can ask for, right?" Lily nodded, but her mind drifted to the events of the day. The school day had started like any other, with the usual teasing and whispers that always seemed to follow her. Jason had been particularly insistent that morning, making remarks about her crutches and laughing as he tried to provoke her. But this time, instead of retreating into herself, she had found the strength to look him in the eye and walk away, ignoring his words. It hadn't been easy, but it had felt like a victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. "What about you?" Lily asked, turning the conversation to Daniel, eager to change the subject and focus on something else. "How's Jake doing? Still keeping you busy?" Daniel's eyes softened at the mention of his son. "Always," he said, a fond smile tugging at his lips. "He's growing up so fast. It feels like just yesterday he was a little kid asking me to read him stories before bed. Now, he's got his own opinions about everything, and he talks my ear off about everything from school to sports." Lily laughed, imagining Jake as a little whirlwind of energy. She had heard Daniel talk about him before, about the challenges and the joys of being a single dad. "Sounds like a handful," she teased. "You have no idea," Daniel replied with a grin. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." There was a warmth between them, a sense of camaraderie that had grown with each passing day. Daniel's steady presence had given Lily something she hadn't realized she needed: someone to share her burdens with, someone who would listen without judgment. And in return, Lily's resilience and growing sense of self-worth had begun to inspire Daniel, reminding him of the strength of the human spirit and the importance of staying connected to the people around us. As the weeks passed, Lily found herself getting stronger, not just physically, but emotionally as well. She had always been quick to dismiss her own strength, too focused on her limitations to see the resilience that had been there all along. It wasn't just about overcoming the obstacles she faced with her disability, it was about learning to thrive despite them. And Daniel, without even trying, had become the person who helped her see that. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light through the cafe windows, Lily walked in a little earlier than usual. She had had a rough day at school. Jason had made yet another cruel comment about her leg, and though she had walked away, the words had stuck with her. She had hoped the day would pass without incident, but it felt like every corner she turned she was reminded of how different she was. When Daniel saw her, he immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes a little downcast. He waved her over, his smile fading slightly as he saw the cloud hanging over her. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft but concerned. Lily sank into the chair across from him, placing her crutches down with a heavy sigh. "Same old stuff," she said, trying to sound nonchalant, but Daniel could hear the fatigue in her voice. "Jason, he just doesn't stop. Every day it's something new, something that makes me feel like I'm just not enough." Daniel's heart broke for her. He had seen the way people treated her, and he knew that the cruelty of others had worn her down. But he also knew that Lily was strong, perhaps stronger than she gave herself credit for. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering sincerity. "You are enough, Lily," he said firmly. "You are more than enough. You don't need anyone's validation to prove your worth. You've got something inside of you that no one can take away. You're strong and you're capable of handling anything that comes your way." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, trying to maintain composure. "I don't feel strong," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm just constantly fighting to keep my head above water, and sometimes I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going." Daniel reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "I know it feels overwhelming, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm here for you, always. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself." Lily's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. She had always believed that she had to handle everything on her own. That was how it had always been. But here, with Daniel, she was beginning to realize that it was okay to lean on someone else. It was okay to accept help, to allow herself to be vulnerable, to let someone else be there for her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Daniel smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't have to worry about that. You've got me, and you've got yourself. And that's all you need." As they sat there in the warm light of the cafe, a quiet understanding passed between them. There were no more words needed. They both knew that this bond they shared was something special, a connection that went beyond just casual conversation or surface-level interactions. It was a deep, unspoken friendship built on mutual respect, empathy, and the understanding that neither of them was truly alone in this world. The following days brought more challenges for Lily, but she faced them with newfound courage. The insults and taunts still came, but they no longer had the same power over her. She had learned how to let them roll off her back, to smile in the face of the people who tried to tear her down. It wasn't easy, but it was becoming second nature. She was finally learning how to stand up for herself, not just with her words but with her actions. One afternoon, as she sat with Daniel in the cafe, she received a message from her teacher. There was going to be a school talent show, and the teacher had suggested that Lily perform. At first, the thought of performing in front of her classmates filled her with dread. What if they laughed at her? What if she embarrassed herself? Then, as she thought about the strengths she had found within herself over the past weeks, something shifted. Maybe this was her chance to show them who she really was, not just the girl with the crutches, but someone who could stand tall, no matter the odds. "I'm thinking about entering the talent show," Lily said, looking up at Daniel, a hesitant but hopeful smile on her face. Daniel's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's awesome. What are you going to do?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then said, "I think I might try singing. I've always loved music, but I've never really had the courage to perform." "Then you should definitely do it," Daniel encouraged, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "You've got this, Lily. I believe in you." His words gave her the final push she needed. The next day, she signed up for the talent show. As the date approached, she practiced every chance she got. Singing in front of people still made her nervous, but she reminded herself that this was her chance to show the world that she was more than a disability. She wasn't just a girl with crutches. She was someone with a voice, with dreams, with the strength to rise above the challenges she faced. The night of the talent show arrived, and Lily stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the murmur of the audience, the chatter of her classmates, but she was focused on one thing: her performance. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had come this far. She had faced so many obstacles, but this was her moment to shine. When her name was called, she limped onto the stage, the spotlight shining brightly on her. The audience fell silent, and for a moment, Lily felt like the whole world was watching her. But then she remembered Daniel's words and the strength she had discovered inside herself. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The sound of her voice filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, Lily felt truly alive. The audience was spellbound. As Lily finished the song, there was a moment of silence, followed by applause. Lily's heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She had stood on that stage, and for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. When she returned to Daniel that evening, she couldn't stop smiling. "I did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I really did it." Daniel's smile was wide. "I knew you would," he said, his voice full of pride. "You've got more courage than you give yourself credit for." Lily looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." In that moment, Lily knew that no matter what the world threw her way, she had the strength to face it. She had discovered that she wasn't defined by her limitations, but by the courage with which she chose to live her life. And with Daniel by her side, she knew she could conquer anything. The weeks that followed Lily's performance in the school talent show marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. For the first time, she truly felt like she was taking control of her destiny. The applause from that night still echoed in her ears as she walked through the halls of her school. And though the whispers had not completely ceased, something had shifted. It wasn't that the world had suddenly become kinder. There were still moments of mockery, still snide comments, but Lily had learned how to carry herself with a newfound confidence, one that was hard to ignore. Her visits to the cafe continued, and every time she walked in, she was greeted by Daniel's warm smile, which had become a comforting constant in her life. It wasn't just the coffee or the cozy atmosphere that drew her there, it was the way Daniel made her feel. Safe, seen, understood. He had become more than just a friend. He had become a mentor of sorts, someone who had helped her unlock a part of herself that she never knew existed. And the more time they spent together, the more Lily began to recognize just how much of an impact Daniel had on her life. On one particularly quiet afternoon, as Lily settled into their usual corner of the cafe, Daniel looked at her with a hint of curiosity. He had noticed the quiet change in her lately, the way she no longer shied away from conversation, the way she seemed to carry herself with a subtle confidence that was hard to ignore. "How's it been going?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but filled with genuine interest. with everything school, life. How are you feeling? Lily looked at him, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. It had been a long week, filled with challenges and moments of self-doubt, but Lily knew she'd come a long way. She had faced her fears, stood up for herself, and had even surprised herself by how much she had grown. But there were still moments of vulnerability, moments when the old insecurities crept back in. Some days are better than others, she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. I guess I've learned to deal with things a little better, but there are still days when it feels hard, like I'm back to square one, like all that progress just disappears. Daniel nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. He knew that growth wasn't linear. It came in waves, with both setbacks and triumphs. I get that, he said gently, but I think what matters is that you're trying. You're not giving up, and that's the hardest part. Lily smiled softly at his words, feeling the weight of them settle into her chest. You're right, she said. I guess I've been so focused on the setbacks that I've forgotten to look at how far I've come. You've come a long way, Lily, Daniel said, his tone firm yet kind. And I think you're finally starting to see yourself the way I see you. Lily's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had always struggled to see herself through a positive lens. But Daniel's words, his belief in her, had made her see things differently. She wasn't just the girl with crutches or the girl who had to overcome every obstacle in her way. She was so much more than that. She was strong, resilient, capable, and it was time she started believing it for herself. As the conversation drifted into lighter topics, Lily's mind wandered back to the talent show performance. The applause had been overwhelming, but what she remembered most was the feeling of standing on that stage, facing an audience that had once made her feel like an outsider, and realizing that she wasn't just doing this for them, she was doing it for herself. That was the moment she had truly felt empowered. She hadn't needed their approval. She had taken her moment and made it hers. The following week, after school, Lily was sitting at her usual table, scrolling through her phone when she received a message from her teacher. The school year was drawing to a close, and the teacher had asked Lily if she would like to take part in a school project, a documentary-style video about overcoming adversity. Lily's first thought was to decline. She wasn't sure if she was ready to share her story in such a public way, especially when she knew how much pain had been wrapped up in her journey. But then she remembered Daniel's words about being seen for who she truly was, and the idea of sharing her story didn't seem as daunting. After a moment's hesitation, she replied to the message, agreeing to participate. The next few days were filled with preparation. The documentary team came to her home, set up cameras, and asked her to talk about her experiences about growing up with a disability, about the struggles she had faced, and about the strengths she had discovered in herself. At first, the questions felt like a floodgate had been opened, but as Lily spoke, she found herself becoming more comfortable. She spoke candidly about the pain of being overlooked, about the hurtful comments, but also about the moments of triumph, the small victories that had shaped her into the person she was today. It wasn't easy, she said during one of the interviews, and there were times when I felt like I would never fit in. But over time I realized that fitting in wasn't the goal. I needed to learn to stand tall, to accept myself for who I am, and to not let anyone make me feel less than what I am. As Lily spoke those words, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She wasn't just sharing her story for the sake of others, she was reclaiming her narrative. She wasn't defined by her disability, by the way others saw her, or by the expectations that had been placed on her. She was defined by her strength, her determination, and her ability to rise above. That afternoon, she met Daniel at the cafe to tell him about the project. As she sat down across from him, her excitement was palpable. I did it, she said, her eyes wide with enthusiasm. I agreed to do the documentary. They're filming me tomorrow. Daniel's eyes lit up, his smile wide with pride. That's amazing, Lily. I knew you could do it. Lily's smile faltered for a moment as she hesitated. I'm still nervous, she admitted. It feels like I'm exposing myself too much. But I think it's time I stop hiding, right? Daniel nodded, his expression soft and reassuring. Absolutely. You've got a powerful story, Lily, and by sharing it, you're not just helping yourself. You're inspiring others who might feel the same way you once did. You've got something to say, and it's important." His words gave her the courage she needed. The next day, as the cameras rolled, Lily found herself speaking from the heart. She talked about the moments of loneliness, the bullying, the self-doubt, but she also spoke about the joy she had discovered in small victories, the simple moments of feeling strong, of standing up for herself, of refusing to let the opinions of others define her. When the filming was over, Lily felt a sense of relief, but also pride. She had shared her story with the world, and for the first time, she felt like she had taken ownership of it. She wasn't just the girl with a disability. She was Lily, a young woman who had faced adversity and come out stronger on the other side. The documentary premiered a few weeks later, and when Lily watched herself on screen, she could hardly recognize the person staring back at her. She was stronger than she had ever realized, more resilient than she had ever given herself credit for. And as she sat there, surrounded by her classmates, watching their reactions, she realized that they weren't just seeing the girl with the crutches, they were seeing her strength, her courage, her heart. After the screening, students who had once ignored her or teased her came up to her, apologizing for their past behavior, telling her how much her story had inspired them. Lily felt a mixture of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and, most of all, a sense of closure. The people who had once made her feel invisible were now seeing her for who she truly was. She had shown them that she was more than just her disability. And yet, despite all the applause and recognition, Lily knew that the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still moments of self-doubt, but she had learned something important, that true strength comes from within. It doesn't come from the approval of others or the recognition of your accomplishments. It comes from the belief that you are worthy, regardless of what anyone else thinks. As Lily walked into the cafe that afternoon, she found Daniel waiting for her. The familiar warmth of the cafe, the sound of the coffee machine in the background, and the sight of Daniel's smile were all things she had come to cherish. "You did it, didn't you?" Daniel asked with a knowing grin. "I did," Lily said, her voice full of pride. "And it feels... incredible." Daniel's eyes shone with pride. "I knew you would," he said simply. Lily smiled, a true smile, one that came from a place of deep understanding. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Daniel reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. "You've always had the strength, Lily. I just helped you find it. And I'm so proud of the person you've become." Lily looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. In that moment, she realized that no matter where life took her, she would always have this strength, this connection, and the knowledge that she was more than enough. With a smile, she took a deep breath, knowing that the future was full of possibilities, and no matter what challenges came her way, she would face them head and stronger, more confident, and ready for anything.